ironies of American history, and it's one we have to face, we can't turn our back on it, is that the very language that is used here about not wanting to be slaves is of course going to be used and believed by individuals who, guess what? Own slaves. Own slaves. Right? So that, for example, when Thomas Jefferson says we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are equal, right? And created equal. And endowed by that Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. He owned slaves, as did the majority of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. That's a part of our history that we cannot walk away from. And yet, the language is powerful as they are hearing it. Notice that the truth is a big part of the argument. Notice that this is an argument made by a religious man to other religious believers that God will protect them and help them win. Very interesting, right? Of course, the English themselves will often have some sense about God on their side as well, right? But now we got to get to 2b, because the rhetorical questions are uppermost. Students will often immediately identify the number of questions that are asked. Do you really want to sit here and let England amass forces against us? Is a rhetorical question. Obviously, the answer to that is no, we cannot allow for this to happen. We have to stand up, we have to fight, right? Notice, 2 different times he will report, for 10 years we've been waiting for England to show us some respect. It obviously hasn't happened. What leads you to believe, notice a rhetorical question, what leads you to believe that all of a sudden they're going to show us respect going forward? It is not going to happen. It's time to fight. Notice on page 102, the argument will be made that they are the ones who actually started this, at the top of page 102. And then he will say, we cannot deceive ourselves any longer. It is time for us, notice, and then this use of and for, as we were talking about repetition, we have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves before the throne. This is, of course, that repetition of that we have. Of course, the power, you can imagine, in delivering a speech like this is that he probably, each one of those we haves, said it a little bit louder, a little bit more forceful, right? So that the ones in the audience who maybe were a little bit leery about this project would have to admit, you know what, he's kind of right on that count. We kind of put up with a lot of garbage for over 10 years from these cats. It is probably time that we stand up and fight. Notice, we don't have any hope if we don't fight, he will say. Words no longer work. I told you that there were 2 things that they used. The first was language and the second was bullets. And of course this is the now call to the bullets. Notice the irony. England is the greatest military force on earth. We're willing to admit that. Now let's go fight them. Follow the argument of that. They're the greatest fighting force on the planet. Now let's fight them. Notice, however, he says at the top of page 103, we're not weak if we make proper use of those means which, notice, the God of nature. It's a phrase you'll want to write down because Jefferson himself will use this phrase, the God of nature. We're going to call this deism, and we'll talk about it more when I hit Jefferson later. Notice, God's on our side. We have enough force. We can actually fight these guys and be successful. Notice, he continues, there is a just God. He will not. He says, we will not retreat in submission and slavery. He says, if war comes, let it come, exclamation point. To finish, notice he says, the time is now. It's an interesting as well at 2b, use of allusions, references to literary text. Notice on page 101, he actually has a reference to Homer's Odyssey. For those of you who studied in your freshman year, you'll maybe remember that Odysseus has this really cool moment when he has all of his men put wax in their ears, and then he has them tie him to a center of the ship, and the beautiful song of the sirens, beautiful women who sing to the sailors, and then they normally will steer their ship onto the rocks and die. Everybody dies. They, of course, can't hear the song of the sirens, but Odysseus, he's tied to the ship's mast so that when he starts screaming to his men, steer me towards them, they won't listen. Of course, what is the allusion here? Well, we've heard these songs about how England's going to, be okay and we're all going to be fine. And his comment is, yeah, it's not going to work. It's a powerful reference. But notice he doesn't say anything about Odysseus. Notice he doesn't say anything about the Odyssey. He assumes his audience knows what this reference will mean. Notice he says, as he's working with this, he simply says, Mr. President, I'm on page 101. It is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against the painful truth and listen to the song of the siren till she transforms us into beasts. Of course, this notion here is one that tells us that he knew his audience was fairly well educated. They knew their Homer, they knew the Odyssey, they knew classical Greek literature. All right, let's do a quick annotation. If somebody were to ask you at 2A, what's this text about, this speech? Can you say it in one word or one line? What is it for you that's at the center of this argument that he's going to make? 2, we've mentioned any number of literary rhetorical devices. What is your favorite one? What's your favorite question that he asks? Is there one that for you is more profound than any of the other ones? You can either ask it, put it in your own words, or you can put it in the very words of our speaker himself. 3A, what is for you the classic text of We Gotta Fight? What is for you the classic movie, or the classic TV show, or maybe for you the classic video game, where the individual says, even though we're outnumbered, even though we probably might not win, let's go and do it anyway? What is for you your favorite movie about being free? That somebody will risk everything for freedom, refuses to be held in slavery of some kind. What is for you your favorite fight movie about fighting for freedom? What's your favorite song? Do you have a song, for example, that you listen to that talks about fighting, standing up, don't give in? Whatever you do, don't give in. I have often said that you can define American history by the simple phrase, don't tell me what to do. And you definitely have that sense in this speech, don't you? Don't you even kind of think that you can tell us what to do, England, the most powerful military in the world. Don't even think you can tell us what to do. It takes a lot of courage to do that. Finally, 3B. Is for you the biggest challenge in your life thus far? To stand up and fight. It may not be a physical fight. It may be a different kind of fight. What is for you a time, though, that you had to make up your mind to do something, are you ready for this? Against all odds. The odds weren't in your favor, and you did it anyway. And you had to come up with a reason to do it. When was the last time you had to convince somebody to do something that you knew that he or she really didn't want to do? And you had to use language to do it. You had to explain it to them in such a way. You had to make a powerful argument. Maybe it was you wanted to go somewhere and the adult figure in your life was saying no. And so you had to make a good argument. And how did you come up with that argument? Did you do it extemporaneously? Or did you write it in some way? Right? And finally, 3B. Let's write it down. How do you feel about the fact that this is some of the very earliest language that will produce the country you now live in? What is it that's so important about this speech in regards to the very word on page 101? Notice Henry uses the very language. Read the opening sentence on page 101 with me now. Mr. President, no man thinks more highly than do I of the patriotism as well as abilities of the very worthy gentleman who just addressed the House. Patriotism. What is your view on patriotism? Do you feel like Americans are more patriotic or less patriotic now? What are your thoughts on that? Do you find Americans understand the value of patriotism more or less? All right, well, there you go. Patrick Henry's speech in the Virginia Convention. Thank you.